Hello and welcome to the Quilters Apothecary. Today our tutorial is going to be on one of my favorite versions of the 45-degree crosshatch in a border. There's a lot of different ways you can do a 45-degree crosshatch in a border, and this is one of my favorite. It always works, and also you don't have to worry so much about math, which is why I like to do it. A couple of the tools that I'm going to use to do this is I've got my red tape for my rulers, just so that I don't have to constantly count the grooves or the marks on whatever form of rulers that you have. The rulers that we're going to be using today are, of course, the Quilters Apothecary 45-degree rulers. We have the Ditcher 2, which has 45-degree lines. This will do a border up to 7 inches. The small 45 will do a border up to 9.5 inches. So it would be one of these two that we would utilize. I would not utilize the medium for the size border that we're doing today, or the large. The large 45 I actually really only tell people to use if they're going to be doing 45-degree crosshatch on a whole quilt, not just the borders. And that would also be with the really deep throat machines like the 30-inch, 32-inch type throats. Otherwise I would stick to the Ditcher 2, the small 45, the medium 45. And that's about as high as I would go, unless you were going to do, like I said, large quilts on big machinery. All right, so let's get started. Let's look at this border. And ahead of time, before I loaded this, what I had done is I folded all 4 sides in half and located the center before I loaded this. Now you want to make sure that that's what you do before you would start the 45-degree border treatment. You have to do that. In my opinion, if you want it to come out efficient and looking like you actually intended to have it look nice. So again, we're going to fold all 4 sides and locate the centers. I'm going to load the quilt. What I have done to kind of pre-prep is I did base the edge of my quilt. I also went ahead and I ditched between the body and the border of the quilt. And frankly, I always do that when I'm doing the 45-degree border treatment. I always start off with that, and it does mean that when I'm doing this I will re-go over some of that ditching line, but this way at least it's stable and it's not going to get distorted. So always I would suggest to ditch between the body and the border within that throat space. If you're on a sit-down machine, then you would have had it basted anyways, and maybe you would go ahead and ditch the whole border. Okay, so that being said, my first registration mark with my machine loaded, or my quilt loaded on the machine, is going to be the center line. My next 2 registration lines are going to be each of the corners. And what I'm going to do is line up my ruler and make sure that I have a perfect 45. And usually on any border, as long as it's an equal border, top, bottom, and sides, you can just put this right on the diagonal from the corner of the quilt up to the top. So now I have a complete 45-degree line. Now the next thing that I would do, and this is where you get to make some choices. So I have days where I get real OCD, and I have days where it's just go for it. I don't have time for this OCD stuff. So depending on which one you are, this is what you can do. You can either pre-mark it ahead of time and then go ahead and quilt it, or you can just go ahead and quilt it using, of course, the rulers. And I'm going to show you the OCD method for that way it'll cover everybody, and you can skip this next step if you so choose to. Okay, so normal circumstances, I would slide the ruler right over here. I've got my tape on the bottom of the ruler. I'm going to do an 1.25 inch grid for this. So I put my tape right on the 1.25 inch because I'm going to be drawing it. If I were to actually bring my machine over and just start quilting it without pre-marking, then I would put it at 1 inch to get 1.25 inch, because most of our machine feet out there have a 1/4 inch foot on them. Now, there are 45-degree lines on the ruler. I'm going to slide that right over to that miter point, and I always start from the miter in towards the center. Most of you know that when I work borders, I always work from corner to the center, and that way I don't have to do math. It always kind of saves me from that horrible step for myself. So now I've got this lined up. I've got my tape line right up to that chalk mark there. I am going to pre-mark, so I'm simply going to do a 45-degree, slide in, and then I line it up again. I make sure that the 45-degree line on the bottom of the ruler goes straight across, pull that over, Tape goes to the previous chalk line, and then I'm going to come down, slide the ruler. And again, as long as I keep this line going straight across on the seam, I'm going to end up with a perfect 45, not 45s that are going to start to angle. Continue over, and I'm going to mark all the way to the center. Okay, so now we are coming up to the center of the border. So as I slide in there, again, where do I want my oddball to be in most of my border treatments? In the center. That way it looks planned. It doesn't look like you get to the end of a border and everything's a mess at the end. I want all my faults to be in the center, and that way it doesn't look like faults. Okay, now down here at this next corner, what we're going to do is we're going to take the 45 at the top. We use the 45 at the bottom to go across. Now we're going to flip the ruler and use the 45 at the top. I'm going to slide that right along that very top seam, right up to this very corner point. Because, of course, I would utilize a 1/4 inch, so I would back that off a 1/4 of an inch if I were actually sewing this rather than marking it. But right now, since we're marking it, I'm going to bring it right up to the line. Slide that right up there. Again, the 45 is following the very top of the quilt seam, straight across. So you get a visual perfect 45. I'm going to keep sliding this now, and we're going to work our way to the center again with this. Slide the ruler, make sure that my 45 is right across the top there. The tape lines up with the previous one. And usually in a border treatment, it's going to go right to this very next one, so you have a perfect half triangle. It's not always the case, but most of the time, more than not, it is the case. And we're going to continue sliding down and marking all the way to the center. Okay, again, we are coming up to the center. And again, I'm keeping that 45-degree line straight across the top of the quilt, making sure that my tape line lines up with that back line there. Okay, now we're over in the left-hand side corner again, and what I did was I very simply lined this up right along with the inner border here, and I extended my 45-degree line all the way down so that I have that nice large corner miter. And then very simply what I'm going to do is I'm going to flip the ruler so that this 45-degree is going to follow between the seam and the border. And I'm going to slide down, make sure that that's straight on the line. I'm going to make sure that my tape mark, which we've talked about earlier, is going to line up with that previous miter mark up there in the corner. And then I'm going to mark this and work my way down. Slide, line, over, slide, make sure that both lines, 45 and this, all the way down within the throat space. Or if you're pre-marking this for a sit-down machine, you can mark the whole border out. And I am using, of course, the bow and chalk that I love so much so that you can pre-mark and then load and the mark will still be there. Okay, so I'm going to finish down this border and then I'll show you the other angle after that. Okay, now for going up on this other angle, I'm very simply going to take and extend a straight line right straight across that way. Now what I'm going to do is slide this over so it stays right on this chalk line over in this corner, which is where a lot of people will blow corners with 45-degree crosshatch. And as long as I keep that there, I'm going to slide that over, and then very simply I can slide my ruler, and again we've got our previous chalk line that we did there, which can line that right up. That's going to go right across there. It's going to be a perfect 45, and we're going to extend that line down. And very simply, I slide back up. I do the same thing as I work my way over. I keep that chalk line right on this line, slide the tape right up to there, come down. Now again, this is of course if you have a shorter ruler than what the corner can handle. If you have one of the medium-sized rulers, 45, then you wouldn't need this. It would cover the whole way across. Come back and down. Slide that over, make sure my 45-degree line is there. Make sure that that's going to line up straight and make my mark. So now I have a perfect 45-degree border marking. Now I'm going to slide over to the other side and I'm going to repeat that process from the right to the left. Okay, so now we're over at the other corner, working our way in. I'm going to line that up. Remember, on the miter, keep my 45-degree line going straight across down the seam. And I'm going to mark on my way in towards the center from this corner miter line. In, slide, make sure you keep your 45 straight, line up to the tape, good, go. In, slide. And again, as you see me quilt this, you'll see how if you had not pre-marked it, you could have very simply just slid the ruler. And again, that's why I like to use the tape. That way I don't even have to think about it. I can slide right to the tape, check my 45-degree line, and then very simply quilt. Okay, so now I want to take a few minutes and take this design and do a little bit more to it than I would normally do to it, just so you can kind of explore yourself. So let's go back down to the center. We have the center of the quilt, and again, normally when I was first marking this, what I did was I went one line over on both sides. And when I looked at that, even though that would have worked well, I would have had more squares in this section where they both run into each other. I decided that what I would rather do is do something just a little bit more decorative, and this is the whole benefit of actually going ahead and marking first before you actually start quilting, at least with the first border, so you know what you're aiming for. So now when I looked at this, I went ahead and I wiped off these chalk marks. I have my center line, so now I have kind of a big square on the diagonal. Now remember, you're not always going to hit this right at the corner. That's the whole thing of vaulting towards the center, which I like. But now as I look at this, if I wanted to take this border another step, what I might do is slide into my squares here, slide into my square line, maybe a half of an inch, 3/4 of an inch, whatever works for you. I am going to go ahead and go an inch. So I'm going to take the marks in 1, 2, 3, 4. So an inch, right to that chalk line, do right down to there. I'm going to flip the ruler, go in an inch again, make sure that that lines up, go right up into that corner, slide my ruler, use my existing square that's already there that I had pre-marked, bring that down, come around, slide my ruler in, an inch. So now I have, obviously, a perfect square inside of another square. Now I have this particular piece double batted. It has a Hobbs 80-20 towards the backing, and then it has a Hobbs, I think it's a poly towards the top. Poly down, I'm sorry, that's it. Okay, so now, again, I'm coming in an inch this way. I've got this perfect square. Once I quilt this, then I will go ahead and I will put filler in here just to add, again, a focus point for the center of the border. Okay, so I brought you back over to the corner because I want us to look at this. Just like we kind of added a little bit of a motif to the center of the border, let's look at this corner for a bit. Actually, what I think I'm going to do is I'm going to go up one, because remember, we have a perfect miter and a perfect miter, which brings perfect balance to each of the corners. So I'm going to go up one, and what I might do is go ahead and get rid of inside. In this case, it's going to be a rectangle. Okay, so we've got this rectangle here. Let me redraw that line. I didn't mean to hit that with the towel. Okay, so we've got that. We've got this blank now. So now what I might do is hop into that corner, put, again, another rectangle inside. So I'm going to use the existing grid that was there. Right there. So now I know that when I quilt it, I will be coming up. When I get to this corner, I will go ahead and do this rectangle first, just like I would be ditching. And then I would bring everything up to the rectangle, all the way up and around, which I'll show you in just a second with the machine, just to see it. And then I'll leave this complete area blank for that relief quilting, and then fill this with some sort of filler. Again, just to add a little bit of positive negative to the border. Sometimes with the 45-degree border, it can end up looking a bit sterile, and so these are just some ways that you can take them and make them just a little bit more decorative, or not. So let's go to the machine and let's quilt this out. Okay, now again, we put fancy cornerstones now in here, and also the center stone. We put a center stone right in the middle of the border. So what I did is I went ahead and I quilted those. I did the thick line around here, and then I did another thick line around here, and in both of the corners. So normally, had I have not put the cornerstones in, I would have utilized the ruler just like when we marked it, started, locked my stitches, come up, over, down, back, over. But because I did the fancier quilt work in the corner and the center, I went ahead and did this first. So now we're going to actually start, when we start quilting, right here within my throat space. I'm going to go up, over, down, and then because of this big square here, I'm just going to go over, up, slide over, come back down, slide over, go all the way up, and then I'll pick this up and then just consistently head right across. So again, it's depending on what you do inside your grids, you have to be a little bit creative on how you travel. And that's, again, why I like to do that ditch work right in between the body and the border. It just saves me from getting any distortion as I travel any sort of path. Okay, I've locked my threads. Now I'm going to go up at my angle. And now, because I did pre-mark, I'm just going to follow my lines that are already there. Come down, stay right on that line outside, which is another reason I like to make any sort of accent mark thick. Come down, slide up in the ditch, go up, slide over, come down, slide over in the ditch, and now I'm going to go up at that angle. Make sure I stay right on my line. I'm going to slide over in the binding space, down. Now if you were actually doing this on a client quilt or a showpiece, you would obviously go a little bit slower. This is simply a practice piece for instruction. Come down. Now I'm going to go back here, pick that diagonal line up, come back. And just so I don't have to go back up into that corner later on, I'm actually just going to slide over and hit my diagonals right over in the corner. You know, it's a bit like continuous curve. You kind of have to pick your path and then go for it as you travel. Now I'm going to come back, and now I can start heading all the way across the top of the quilt. Okay, so now we have the top portion of our border done. What we're going to do, and this is based on how you want to continue with this. If you're on a stand-up machine, you can continue down the sides just as we've been going. Remember, you will have the middles marked on the sides. So I would make sure to bring the middle up to here as you roll your quilt once you get to that point, and then focus on what kind of decorative design you want to put in the center down the side. They don't always have to be the same as what's on the top. As long as they're consistent from side to side, you're going to be good, or top to bottom. Or the other option is you could actually go down to the center, and then as you continue your quilt, just base the sides from the center down and then work from the bottom up after you finish the rest of the quilt. It's one way to not have to turn a quilt, or there's the other option. You could also turn the quilt. Frankly, what I like to do is I like to work down the sides. I get to the center area, and then I plan that with the chalk before I actually quilt that center section. Then I measure just like from here. So here was our center chalk line, and when I worked my first side down here, I would measure from here to here and then pick that up the opposite way, and that way I can work my way all the way down without turning. It's one of those things you kind of have to do it once or twice just to get the feel of it. And as anything with quilting, everything gets a little easier with time. I hope you've enjoyed this tutorial, and as always, take care of yourself and each other, and we will see you down the road.